At some point, you probably told yourself this: I'm just being lazy. Maybe you didn't say it out loud, but you felt it. You didn't follow through. You didn't stay consistent. You didn't do the thing you said you were going to do. And the conclusion your mind jumps to is simple. There must be something wrong with me. But what if that's not actually true? What if what you're calling laziness isn't laziness at all? Hi, I'm Paul. This is Tarot Logic. Let's talk about it, because this is one idea, if you really understand it, can completely change how you see yourself. Now, most people define laziness as a lack of effort. You didn't try hard enough. You didn't push yourself. You didn't stay disciplined. But if you look closer at your own life, something doesn't quite add up. There are areas where you do have energy, where you can focus, where you do show up consistently. And then there are areas where you just can't. Not because you don't care, but because something in you resists it. And that inconsistency is important. Because real laziness would be global, right? You'd avoid everything. That's not what's happening. You're selective. And that selectivity is a clue. Let's go deeper. What people call laziness is often a mismatch, right, between what they're doing and who they actually are. A misalignment between action and identity, between effort and meaning, between the life you're living and the person you're becoming. Psychologically, now this is going to show up as internal friction, right? James Hollis talks about this as the tension between the adapted self and the true self. The adapted self is the version of you that learned how to function, follows rules, meets expectations, does what makes sense. But the true self, that's something else altogether. It's quieter. It's more instinctive. It's less concerned with what you're supposed to do and more concerned with what actually feels real. And when those two versions of you are aligned, effort feels natural, right? You don't have to force yourself, you just move. But when they're misaligned, everything feels heavy, right? Even the simple things. And this is where people get stuck, because they're trying to solve the problem at the level of discipline. They say things like, I just need to be more consistent, I need more willpower, just need to push harder. But the underlying issue is that misalignment. More force isn't going to fix it, right? More force is going to amplify the resistance itself. Now let's look at what's happening in the brain. Because again, this isn't just psychological, it's biological. Yeah. Your brain is constantly evaluating effort versus reward. And one of the key systems involved in that evaluation is dopamine. And dopamine is not just about pleasure. It's about perceived value. Okay? It's how we talk about cups cards in tarot. Your brain asks one simple question: is it worth the energy? If the answer is yes, you feel motivated. If the answer is no, you feel resistance. So when you sit down to do something and you feel that immediate lack of energy, that hesitation, that urge to avoid it, your brain isn't saying, I'm lazy. No, it's saying, this doesn't feel meaningful enough to justify the effort. And that signal might be accurate. Now here's where it gets tricky. Because sometimes the thing you're avoiding is important. Yeah, so you think, oh, I just need to push through. And sometimes that's true. But if you're constantly needing to override yourself, that's not discipline. That's misalignment. Now we can try to make this more real. Okay, we'll use an example. You might have a goal that sounds good on paper, like a career path or a routine or a lifestyle. Something that makes sense logically. But every time you try to engage with it, you feel drained. You procrastinate. You avoid it. And then you judge yourself for that avoidance. But what if the problem isn't your behavior? What if the problem is the goal itself? Or, maybe it's not the goal, but the way you're approaching it, the structure, the environment, the expectations that you've placed on yourself. Because misalignment doesn't always mean you're in the wrong life. Okay? Sometimes it means you're interacting with your life in the wrong way. So let's bring in our symbolic layer. There's a tarot archetype that speaks directly to this. The Two of Swords. It's a figure sitting still, right? Blindfolded, holding two opposite forces, unable to move. Not because they're incapable, but because they're divided. Internally split. And that's what misalignment feels like. Part of you wants to move forward. Another part of you resists. So we stay stuck. And from the outside, it looks like inaction. It looks like laziness. But what it really is internally, it's conflict. So, my friends, what do you do with this? How do you actually shift, out of that state? Well, first, you have to stop labeling yourself as lazy. Because that label will just completely shut down curiosity. It turns a complex problem into a simple judgment. And once you label yourself that way, you're going to stop trying to investigate what's actually happening. Second, start asking better questions. Instead of, why can't I do this? Ask yourself, what feels off about this? Is it the goal? Is it the timeline? Is it the pressure? Is it the environment? Is it the way you're measuring your success? Because somewhere in that structure, there's friction. And third, very important, pay attention to where your energy naturally goes not in a fantasy sense, but in like a real grounded type of way. What do you find yourself thinking about? What do you engage with without forcing it? What pulls your attention? Because alignment often reveals itself through energy, not through obligation. Okay? And now, fourth, experiment with small adjustments. Not these huge, massive life changes, tower moments, right? But small shifts in how you approach things. Change the structure a little bit. Maybe tinker with the timing. Yeah? Maybe change the context. See what happens. Because sometimes just that slight realignment, readjustment, will change everything. And finally, you accept that not everything is meant to be forced. There are things in your life that will definitely require effort, okay? That's normal. But there's a difference between effort and constant resistance. Effort feels like movement. Resistance feels like friction. And I think learning to tell the difference is a vital key. So if you've been calling yourself lazy, if you've been frustrated with your lack of consistency, if you've been wondering why you can't seem to follow through, pause. Look deeper. Because there's a good chance you're not broken. You're not lacking discipline. You're not fundamentally flawed. You're misaligned. And once you start addressing that, everything changes. Not instantly, but meaningfully.